Welcome to the Innovation by Design podcast. And in this podcast, we explore how design thinking drives innovation across the architecture, engineering, and construction industries. My name is Evan Troxel, and as usual, I'm joined by my co-host, Candace Kitchen. Candace, will you please introduce our guest today?
Absolutely. Thanks, Evan. Today we have Sherry Harbaugh. We're really excited for her to be on this podcast today. She's spent over 30 years in the A&E industry and has spent a lot of time teaching new students and upcoming specifiers. So, Sherry, if you could just start telling us about your story and really tell us what keeps that passion and that drive for you.
Sure. So I'm often asked, like, how did I come to specifications? And I had spent the first couple of years out of college kind of waffling, as many people do, trying to figure out, like, this isn't what I thought. I went into architecture thinking one thing, but the reality of it is we don't do what we thought we were going to be doing. For whatever reason, our fantasy as children growing up, thinking that we're going to do architecture, defining what that is was a struggle once I got out of college. The different paths and even the paths that a lot of my classmates took, trying to figure out how do we fit into this huge world of construction. Because now I call it construction now because it used to be architecture because we're so focused on architecture when we're in school. But the reality is that when we graduate, we are boosted into construction. We're not just doing the design that they teach us, the theories that they teach us in school. All of a sudden, we're seeing the realities. And I spent the first year erasing acoustical ceiling plans because we didn't have CAD back then and moving them over 6 inches or, just doing these minor details or toilet room elevations over and over again. It's just...
Sherry, can you just really, for the audience out there, okay, because today erasing means selecting things and hitting the delete key, right?
Yes.
So what do you really mean when you say erasing?
Erasing, real eraser. The real eraser, electric erasers with eraser templates so that you didn't erase too much. The electric erasers with the long erasers that you feed in and go get up.
I'm going to grab one. Watch this.
Oh, okay. He still has one? It's a relic.
Not only do I have one, it is still in the original packaging.
Oh, geez.
Here. Look at that. It's an eraser shield.
Yeah,
this is a very thin metal device, and you place it over the line work or the lettering or whatever you need to erase. Hopefully you're erasing graphite and not ink, but that happened too.
Yes.
And you would place this over so you could be really precise with your erasing because sometimes you needed to be precise. It's not just like scrubbing the page clean, right? It's like, oh no, I just need to get this little bit off.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. It's it was not my vision of architecture, but It was going on and on and on. And so anyway, after a year I left and because I thought there has to be another path. There's something that I enjoy doing. I don't know how people are doing this. And so I went to work for a small architectural firm in Sacramento, and I was given a lot more freedom to explore architecture and really figure out where I fit. And I was given a project to do from start to finish. And then so I got it through permit, and then we went into construction, and all of a sudden I was given this specification. And I was like, what is this? And where did it come from? And who wrote it? And turns out I had to enforce it, and I didn't know what it said. So that was eye-opening to try to figure out, what are specifications? And it was a great experience. I was able to take that project through construction administration. I learned a ton, and I just thought, you know what? This is an area that small firms, like the one I was working for, they don't have the capacity to do this. And it's such an important piece of the construction. And so that's when I really started focusing in on construction specifications. And then my next job was a junior specifier at a large firm. So I started that path at that point, and it was the right thing. It was definitely the right thing. It was so engaging because I was doing something different all the time.
can you just kind of define what the specification process is for those who are listening who don't know?
The process of putting together a specification starts with working with the drawings and identifying what are the materials that need to be further defined so that the contractor can actually have enough information to go out to bid. That's kind of the overview that I kind of share is if it doesn't say it on the drawings, how does the contractor know what to bid for the project? So it's filling in those holes and really helping everybody work together to make sure that that vision from the drawings is carried through into construction. So working with the design team to identify those materials and then working with manufacturers reps to identify solutions and getting those into the hands of the contractor.
So for example, a lot of times on the drawings, you're going to see something a little more generic, like in a tag, right? Somebody who is doing the drawings will tag a particular part of a wall assembly or a ceiling or a floor or whatever, and they'll say acoustic panels, for example. But then that tag will refer to a specification or, usually a detail first and then a specification, where in the detail, it'll show more specific information that shows maybe the thickness of the panel and the placement of the panel on the wall, like where the panel needs to start and stop. And then that'll refer to a specification where it's like, here's the nitty gritty details of exactly the panel or similar, right? Is the kind of thing that we actually want you to purchase and then install. And so, because, if you just say wall panel, it's like, well, the world is your oyster. That could mean so many things. So a lot of times there's kind of layers of specificity in the contract documents. And contract documents are drawings, and they're also specifications, right? This is what we say, it's half of the contract documents. And so it's interesting, like when you telling your story, right? It's like, there's this thing called specifications, and I didn't know what that was. Like, okay, so that just kind of shows education, in architectural education. Like, this is not something that's focused on in architectural education, and you've kind of taken that on as yourself. And so I'm curious to hear, kind of, obviously you've been through a journey of, I didn't even know this thing existed. Now this is something I want to pursue. I'm working on something new all the time, like you said. And this is not something that even really gets mentioned in architectural school, because there's a lot of roles in an architectural firm that don't get mentioned in school beyond kind of the typical ones that schools train for. So I'm just curious, kind of, what does that bring up for you when I kind of go through all that?
Yeah, I think that it brings up a lot of things.
Yeah, sorry, it's broad.
I am I would be a mentor for a mentee at my alma mater, and he asks me, one of his first questions is, what do you think I am going to be doing when I graduate? And I'm like, wow, to have the insight to ask that in your third year of school, that's great. I didn't think to ask that until I was out. So that's really great. So for me to be able to say there's a lot of paths. There's a lot of paths in architecture once you graduate, but unfortunately, we don't give them paths in our education system. We don't get paths. And once we get to our architecture firms, we don't have time to onboard. And I think filling in those gaps is where I really got frustrated making my transition. And I've talked to others, like, do you think you could have been further ahead on your career path earlier had we known about these things when we graduated? Would it be possible to get into your third or fourth year of education and go, here's some options? Maybe I'm not going to be a great designer. And so my fourth and fifth year can be focused on specifications, material research, doing that kind of stuff, project management. I mean, that's a whole career, managing projects or going for proposals, right? Maybe you're in contracts. Maybe your eyes on contracts. Wouldn't it be great to come out of school a little bit more rounded about how to run an office? Maybe it's managerial, the kind of the being I can't think of the name of it, but the manager of the architectural firms, the hiring and firing, the personnel type.
Right.
Just having those different career paths earlier on. So for me, getting people, my passion would be getting students to recognize that there are other things out there. It doesn't have to be specifications. And even I always say, I don't want to train thousands of specifiers. I want to train thousands of people who understand specifications so they don't get in binds anymore. So you understand that you can resolve the problem on your own by looking at the specification, that you don't have to ask me to troubleshoot it. One of the realities about specifiers also is that they're the last person on the job. We usually start a job and we finish a job, but in between there's project managers that are leaving, they're switching firms, they're going here and there, they're being let go, they're getting a better job offer. And some of our projects, I'm just finishing a project that we started in 2016, and it's now under construction.
Yes.
And I'm the last person on the job that knows that knows what I know.
You're the continuity
Yeah.
of that whole project.
Yeah, I'm the string.
Right.
I'm the string for all those years. And, I was thinking this morning about this podcast, and I was thinking back to somebody had described specifications as just word processing. And she's just a word processor.
Ouch.
And I'm like, that's like calling an architect a drafter, right? Yeah. It's like there's so much more to it that you don't understand. And when you recognize that the project you started, you may be the only one that holds that project knowledge at the end, that's a lot more than a word processor. A lot more. And
I had a similar experience, and you may or may not relate to this, but I think it ties into what you were just saying. I had a principal once tell me, "Oh, you just get to do the fun part of the job. Like there's just a fun part to architecture," and that was quote unquote design, right? It's putting pretty pictures, according to this person, putting pretty pictures on the wall. Everybody standing around, congratulate. This never happened, right? As soon as we put something on the wall, we are literally ripping it apart, right? That's what we do when we put architecture and ideas up on the wall. And I had to explain to him, how do you feel about being vulnerable enough to put your ideas on the wall and then have people rip them to shreds? Because, okay, yes, design is fun, and that is something that I'm very good at. Maybe I make it look easy, good. I don't know. It's like an athlete who is just, okay, flawless execution. You're incredible. Well, it's because you're an expert at it, right? And so even with specifications, right, you are a complete expert. You make it look easy. It's not that easy for the average person to pull it off. And I just felt like that was kind of a naive thing to say, right? It's like, okay, well, what you do, you're business development, and you make that look easy. And you look like you're having fun doing it too. I just thought it was a little condescending, right?
Yeah.
It's like taking what you do in your specialty and kind of minimizing it by saying, oh, well, you get to do I'm doing the hard work over here. You get to do the fun stuff. And I felt like, okay, it's got to be something similar with specifications. Oh, that's just word processing. And like you said, like just saying just to an architect, oh, you're just a drafts person, right? No, there's so much more to it than what is at the surface.
Yeah, and I think that's true in a lot of professions, even,
Sure.
And I'm going to go ahead and grab teaching as an example. The hours it takes to put together material and trying to recreate material so that it's enticing for someone to listen to or participate in, trying to do those hooks that want people to look a little bit deeper or, let's talk about specifications too. What can you say about specifications to make people look at it a second time, to want people to do material research? What is the word that can really make it grabbing for people to go, oh, that sounds really interesting. What is that? It's tough.
Yeah,
it's tough.
Absolutely.
I think that's so important to talk about because you spend a lot of your time teaching and mentoring. And so can you tell us a little bit about who you're targeting and what you're talking about and what your goal is?
Yeah. So I started out targeting architects. Well, they want nothing to do with specifications, right? So that starts the creative process. Well, what do they need it, but they don't want to admit to it, right? So I just redid my website, and there's very little on there about specifications, but there's a lot on there about quality control, technical documents, that kind of thing. And it's difficult to get architects to buy into that, right? So I'm going to see how this new approach works for them. The group that has been the most interested in it is manufacturers reps. I think the manufacturers reps, they're onboarding more new people on a regular basis than the architecture companies, the architectural firms. The architectural firms are kind of onboarding their college kids, right? They're coming out of school, so it's a fall thing. And they definitely need, I'm trying to work up a kind of a 3 or 4 week plan of onboarding that can be generic enough that can work for all firms. Because there's just some basic knowledge about construction documents, not just specifications, but look at the contracts, for instance, and understanding your delivery methods, design build versus design bid build. Huge. I didn't know that coming out of school. How do you learn that stuff? How do you know the difference in what the different drawings and specs? What do the contract documents look like depending on your delivery method? So there's a lot of just basic construction terminology that a lot of the college kids need to know coming into. So I'm working on a generic onboarding, so it doesn't have to be firm specific. But back to the manufacturers reps, they're onboarding people year round, right? It's a continual onboarding thing. And they're not coming from a background, oftentimes, they're not coming from a background with construction. So construction speak, how to build a network in a construction industry where you don't know what it is, right? You've seen buildings built, but you don't really know how or why, but the job opportunity looked great. So you applied and you got it. I met somebody who worked for a manufacturer or a home manufacturer. And I was like, well, how did you get into it? He goes, they had a job opening. And so I applied and I got it. He's an accountant. He had no idea what he was getting into. But then all of a sudden he's thrown into this and he's cost estimates and what are these building materials and what's Division 1? All these basic questions that you really need to know if you're going to get involved in the construction industry. I don't care who you are. If you're in the industry, you need that basic knowledge. So that's kind of I'm just constantly seeing these niches of gaps that need to be bridged with some kind of information. So that's what keeps me going. That's what I'm always identifying. Oh, well, you might need this or you need that.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about your business model and the way that you go. So you started a firm, your firm, 31 years ago, and you offer products, you offer courses, and you're not like a traditional architect working at a firm,
correct,
sitting behind, right, designing buildings. You've identified these gaps, as you put it, and you've taken it upon yourself to say, oh, I can fill that gap and I can fill that gap. Can you just kind of take that step back, that wider perspective, and talk about why you've decided to pursue this route? I mean, obviously you have a passion to do this, but I'm curious, like, I think a lot of architects feel like, okay, man, I spent all this money on this education. I've got the degree. Maybe they have their license, maybe not. But then it's like, oh, I have to do this thing because I have all these sunk costs. Like I paid the money, I did the time, I did all now I have to do this. And you've taken a completely different route through the profession.
Yeah, I think the thing was I just wasn't happy. I just wasn't satisfied with where I was. I wasn't excited about what I was doing or going to work. And I was that person that was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to tell my parents that I don't like what I'm doing?
Expectations are that's a thing that's always weighing on us.
Yeah.
Right?
And then what about my classmates? I really liked the people that I worked with or, that I grew up with in college. We spent 5 years together and now I'm not going to do what they're doing. How can I be such an outsider? And it was a lot of soul searching to try to get over this, to try to like find the path that I was comfortable with. And to CSI's credit, so CSI is Construction Specifications Institute, and I joined both CSI and AIA as student members right out of college. I was just that person who was always involved. I was in a sorority. I, did a lot of leadership stuff through college and high school. And so I was going to start my networking. And, that's what you did back there in the 90s. We didn't have all this online social stuff. And so I did. I joined CSI and AIA, and the CSI group really surrounded me. They really were like, this is what we do. And it wasn't all, there was a huge crossover back in the early 90s of AIA and CSI members. The membership was a lot. So I was seeing the same people at both events. And so networking with both groups of people were great. Getting put into these leadership positions were great. And then identifying that, I really like working with materials. Not just the people, but I enjoyed listening to the presentations on the materials. And that really helped also guide me. So when I got into the construction administration for that project and I had an issue, I knew that I could call one of my friends that I had met at the networking event and say, hey, this is what's going on. Is this right? Oh, what's wrong here? And they could help talk me through it. And so it was really important to be able to have that network of people that you could feel comfortable talking your problems out without feeling like you were going to be like, oh, you don't know that.
Yeah.
There's no condescending there. There was an open communication. And I really appreciated that about CSI and AIA too at the time. But the CSI group is the one that really pulled me forward, got me some more leadership training. So I was a lot more confident in how I was able to present myself on site. And I think that is kind of that type of mentoring, network mentoring, I guess you can call it, really helped me identify that if that type of information can pull me from where I was to where I am, that's what I can do to contribute, kind of that giving back to the industry of this is how I learned and this is how I can help other people learn. And I think that's been huge, being able to educate people. And I got involved with teaching the CDT, the Construction Documents Technologist program through CSI. And I've taught that for many years. And it's so rewarding to work with people who are just anxious to fight. Really, they start the CDT just hoping to pass the test. But by the time they're done studying for it, they're just so excited about the new. You're laughing, Candace. I get it, because you've been through it. Yeah, they're like, oh, that's what it's all about. Oh, there's a substitution request form I can fill in. This is so cool. It's really eye opening to have that, and that's really rewarding for me.
Yeah, I love that. What you were saying, I was thinking, oh man, that takes a lot of courage to switch over, but just all of that evidence that you just gave with, well, I had a great network and I was involved with a lot of different people and they encouraged me and now I'm passing that forward. I just think that speaks volumes to who you are and what you're doing and what your firm is all about. And it's really, really important. And oftentimes overlooked just how important the people in the industry that you meet are. And so keeping those connections and using things like LinkedIn. I know you're very active on LinkedIn. And that's how you also have advertised a lot of your seminars that you've put on.
Yeah, I really lean on LinkedIn now. I have if anybody attends one of my seminars, I add them to my mailing list. I think that's okay to do. And so that's how I've built up my my list that I send out. I try to not bombard people, but I try to get out there 3 or 4 times a year and say, this is what's going on. This is what's coming up. And whether it's free or pay for events and some links and some other things that are, happening in the industry, just to share knowledge. That's what it comes down to, is sharing knowledge. And how do we do that? And again, that this lack of in-person networking, it's been really slow, at least where I am in Spokane. It's been really slow to come back to in-person networking. And boy, I sure feel it. I feel like it's time to get out there and who's doing what, where, because I really miss that.
Yeah. I agree. I'm in a rural community as well, and I go to the one AIA Lunch and Learn per quarter that they offer around here, maybe. And there's like 9 people show up, right? It's just, well, there aren't that many architects, first of all, in this area, but also it's very difficult to get people away from the deadlines. Let's just put it that way. Maybe that's it, and maybe it's I don't know what it is, but it is difficult in some areas still. Because I know there's people probably listening, like, what do you mean? Like, there's hundreds of people, and no, not everywhere, right? Not everywhere, and so it is a challenge. Yeah, one of the things that I think people think of when they think about innovation, like the name of the podcast, Innovation by Design, and they think technology, and they think that there's some, there's always a new shiny thing, right? There's a lot of that going on. But I think innovation can mean something very different. So I'm curious what you think innovation in architecture could mean today, and does it always have to do with technology, or could it mean other things?
Gosh, I was thinking about innovation this morning, also thinking forward to this podcast. And as far as specifications go, we have had new shiny things, right? We've got software now. We didn't have that 30 years ago. Of course, we didn't have FedEx either 50 years ago. But I think that that new shiny thing, software, was kind of like, or, were they saying spec writers will become dinosaurs, right? They're going away. We won't need specs anymore. And I think the reverse is true, right? We need us more than ever now. And with AI on the forefront, we still need us because AI is not really doing the job that it should, especially now. When you do searches and you're getting these old firms that are companies that are no longer in business or have bought out or been sold or whatever. So we're not getting the right products. If we're getting a list from Google or one of the search engines and they're coming in alphabetical order, or the number of hits, that's not making it a viable product. And so we really do need the specifiers, that human touch, to go in and really vet what those products are. So I think that innovation in architecture has a long way to go, unfortunately. I think people were grabbing that as the next shiny object, like, oh, we got this made, but I'm not feeling that yet. Maybe in 20 or 30 years, but right now I'm not feeling it. And I think we have some great software systems. All the software that's out there for specification writing, they're all great. They're all great from the ones that I've, experienced or watched demonstrations of. And I always tell people there's not one that's better than another, but there is one right for you. You just have to figure out which one is right for your company and the way your company works. That's about the only other, the AI innovation is the one that I'm seeing right now, of course, on the forefront. Not as a solution, but definitely out there.
Well, something that you've touched on now in a couple different ways is just the human side of it, which makes me think about relationships. And I assume specification writers really need to have good relationships with product manufacturers, because you can't possibly be an expert in all of the things that make up a building. And so, AI is more transactional in that regard, right? It's using historical data that has been trained on, which may or may not be accurate or current. Let's just say it that way. And so, like, you still need to know the right person, I would assume, to ask about the things so that you can get that spec as accurate as possible when that project goes to bid. And so could you just kind of speak to that aspect of specification writing and how important having that network is to you?
Yeah, and I feel like we started talking about that and then we veered away from it. And so thank you for bringing that back. Yes, manufacturers reps. Candace is priceless. Yeah, the manufacturers reps are the people who actually know the products, right? So we can do research on them, and we can take all the software is embedded with, different manufacturers' products, or, a description, but it all has to be validated. And there's, like you said, Evan, there's no way that a specifier can be an expert in the thousands of products that are needed for a project. And the other way that I use them is, I use this as one of my strategies, is if there's a specification section, if there's a material curtain wall, for instance, or elevators, where there's just so many moving parts and you're really not sure or confident, or you're a young specifier and you don't know what it says. I always say, take that spec and get it to the manufacturer's rep and let them work on it so you can work on fire extinguishers or do something that you can get your hands around. Because sometimes these materials get so out of, they're just so large, or they're so assembly driven, right? If you're working on an exterior wall assembly, we're still specifying materials by individual product, not assembly in many cases. Mm-hmm. And so you're working on the insulation, the air barrier, the sheathing, the cladding. So every individually, as opposed to an entire assembly, which can have some issues with it, right?
Sure.
Because we want to say it once, and we might be using insulation in 3 different places, but we want to say it in one, but we want to do an assembly, but how does this all work? And so talking to the manufacturer's reps about what does your product really do? What does it need to say? And how are we going to convey that best so that the contractor can figure it out too? Because we want to make it as clear as possible, not only for the architect who's reviewing the specs, but for the contractor who has to build it, and the subs, because they need to communicate to the subs. So trying to make it as simple as possible is really sometimes very challenging. So getting it to the product reps, I think is the best solution to getting the problem solved correctly.
And I would assume getting their experience, like you said, with assemblies, maybe they've seen that before. Mm-hmm. Or maybe they have somebody they could reach out to get more information, because context matters when it comes to products, right? Like you're talking about assemblies, you're talking about this being applied to that, or this going next to that, this adjacent to that, however you want to say it. And there's layers in assemblies, and these things have to interface with each other at some level, right? We do a drawing in architecture, and it's like it's just magically everything is held together. Not in the real world. There's gravity, there's forces, there's all these things. And so, if we're going to stick a nail or a screw through a water barrier, what then, right? And those are the kinds of questions where those relationships come in as key factors in making decisions about what we're going to use on products or on projects as well, mm-hmm. because maybe that product's not the right thing to use. Mm-hmm. And getting that information is just as valuable as yes, this is going to work, right? Yeah. So that's all part of that conversation that you can have with somebody that is going to be way beyond the information I could find on a website.
Right. And I love that what then, because a lot of times we don't know. As specifiers, as architects, we don't know what then. And what a great question to ask. What then? I love that. Might be asking that a lot in the future.
I always like to say, like, tell me first of all, like, what questions should I be asking you, right? Like, that's a great way to start, because, mm-hmm. oh, wow, this comes up all the time. And it's very hard to convey that information on a website, because, okay, you can do case studies forever, but I need to find the information fast as an architect. Like you said, we have 1,000 products to look through. We don't have time to do the full research on every single one of those. And so, any information that they can pass along just over the phone, a 20-minute phone call would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like to tell manufacturers reps when they're presenting to architects is ask them first, like when you go to a restaurant and they always say, is this the first time you've been here? Mm-hmm. Well, let me tell you about my restaurant, What do you know about my product? Let's start there. What do you know?
Or what do you think you know?
Or what do you think you know? Yeah. And I think the other uncomfortable situation is product shows. I think product shows are really difficult. I love the way some of these one-on-ones have been set up, like the Master Specifier Retreat, for example, where you're assigned someone to sit down and talk to them. And you're having a conversation with that person, as opposed to walking down the aisle in a product show going, no, I don't want to.
So much pressure.
Yeah, because you don't want to admit what you do or don't know.
Right.
And you're like, I don't know if I have questions or not, because I don't know who you are or what you have. Right. So there's a couple situations like out there that I think really need to be kind of worked over in our next generation or next 20 years or whatever. Of product or product prep architect interactions.
You know, you mentioned about vetting out the information, but then earlier you said something about, uh-oh, now I've got to enforce it. So how can we, and when I say we, I mean manufacturers, reps, specifiers, anybody in the industry, support that enforcement so that they know what they're enforcing?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that we talk about a lot is, as specifiers, is trying to help the architect make a defendable decision. Like, why? Just really vetting out, why did you choose this? What are the salient characteristics of that product that made you use that as a basis of design? So that when it comes down to it, we can say, well, this is why we chose that product. And if you want to substitute it, you need to bridge these things that we thought were really important about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that can be a real challenge. And like Candace, you've got a very proprietary product that makes it difficult to, what is your or equal or similar product, and how do we? If I talk to you about that, what is going to make something else close to that, and how do I defend my decision to use Total Door against some competitor, ABC competitor, so a lot of those decisions really need to be pinned down so that when we come up against those questions, we've got answers. And that's part of that documentation period of, well, we did talk about that, and this is what we decided, and this is why we decided it. So it's a no. We're not doing it.
That's a useful tactic, I guess, when not just with contractors, but with owners too. I mean, especially on big projects where it's like, these things cost X dollars. Why are you using that on this project? I know there's cheaper, whatever that thing is.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to have that justification to say, no, like, here's why. This is the performance that we require. This is whatever those things are. To have that information that's really valuable so that you can defend your position.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not like we chose things willy-nilly. This is not a lightweight subject. This is your reputation a lot of times sits on these kinds of decisions. Obviously, the performance of the building long-term sits on these, which again comes back to your reputation or potential lawsuits or any number of things. So it's really valuable to have that kind of information so that you are assured that you're making the right choice and that you can defend it when the questions come up. They always come up.
They do.
Way, right?
They do. Why is that? Yeah. And I'm finding a lot of manufacturers, I don't know how you could quantify my term a lot of, but many manufacturers are starting to use installers, qualified installers, or qualifying their installers, or making them do a training. And I'm seeing that a lot more in our industry, because there's a number out there, I don't know, 80 or 90% of failures are due to the installation. And so they're not willing to bank on that anymore. They want to make sure that the installation is correct, and that's reducing the failures.
Yeah. Do it right the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So something I read that I thought was really interesting on your website, Sherry, was this stance you have about starting from a blank page. And, coming from the technology side of architecture, I think there's a general pushback, especially on the tech side, that says architects should not have to start from a blank page because various reasons, right? Obviously, it's inefficient to start from a blank page every time. You've probably come up with layouts that will work before, and so you should be able to reuse that work. As a designer, I definitely have some allergy to like this, you shouldn't start from a blank page, because I want to explore possibilities, and I really believe that's where an architect's value is in the design process, is coming up with, it's not just coming up with new things to come up with new things, right? It's actually like you have a completely unique set of circumstances that you need to design to, questions you need to answer, requests that you need to fulfill. It's all these things. And I'm not saying that every project is a unicorn, right? Every project is not. But there's many times when starting from a blank page is absolutely the right thing to do. And then a lot of time, and many other times, it's, at least I'll get to a point where, okay, now I can take those templates, or now I can take those pre-done layouts and plug them into my design and maybe modify them a little bit. But you have a really interesting take that I've heard about. I can't remember if I read it or if I heard it in a previous podcast interview with you, regarding specifications starting from a blank page being a good idea. Could you talk about that?
I'm trying to remember where I
Well,
would
your
have said
position,
that.
I'll remind
But
you. So your position was, it was a great idea to start from a blank page because it forces you to, and it's not, you do have master specs, right? You do have these,
Correct.
you do,
Yeah.
but I think you were specifically talking about like not using boilerplate. And I will say a lot of architects love copying and pasting,
Right.
especially when it comes to specifications.
Yes.
And then a lot of errors pop up because of that. So maybe
Yeah,
that.
and that's probably where I would have been going with that. I encourage people to get a guide spec, use it or develop it as a master for your office. So it's already edited down to what your office is typically used to. I do it. I've got my master, and I have a master guide spec, and it's edited down to my office master, because even I don't want to have to go down and do joint sealants every time I do joint sealants. So
Sure.
I have an office master that's edited, so I can do joint sealants in a matter of minutes for my first draft. And then if I need to come back and say, oh, it's only interior, I don't need all this exterior stuff, and I can take it out. But starting from that basic template, even my guide spec, it has track changes in it. So I can see what I took out of the master, so that I'm seeing what was removed in case I think, oh yeah, I forgot, I need that. Take wood doors for an example, an easy example. You take a project from an old spec that had just wood doors, not fire rated wood doors. So when you're reviewing that spec, you don't think, oh, I need fire rated doors. You're just reading it going, yep, I got doors, check. But if you were to look at that track changed version and you're reading through, you go, oh, I don't know. And it makes you think, okay, well, maybe I do have fire rate. Oh, I do. So you can undelete the fire ratings on that door. That's just a simple example of how at least seeing what was removed can help trigger that question. If you don't, I don't know, can't see it, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Right. Out of sight,
So
out
at
of
least
mind.
it's
Yep.
there so you can see it. So that's what I encourage people to do, is use something that has all the options in it that are already deleted. So you can still print it if you don't have, it's like, oh yeah, that works perfect, done. But if you don't know that it wasn't there and then you overlook it, it's so easy to miss things like that. And of course, that job that I was doing CA on, I didn't write the spec for it, but I had to enforce it. And it did have some provisions in there for elevators. And of course, one of the first RFIs I get is, there's no elevator on this job. I'm like, you're right. Where did you see that? So it's that kind of thing. I think the contractor makes you aware of what's really in there, because the contractors are reading that so closely, much more closely than we are. I think in a lot of cases, they read it more closely than the architect does, because they're relying on that. They're relying on those construction documents to build the building. And if we've got stuff in there that's floating around from a previous project, they just love to hassle us. People like to be hassled.
They're rolling their eyes, yes, and letting you know about it. So you mentioned a mistake like that, like the elevator one. What are some other kind of common mistakes that you see in specifications, and what are the consequences of those? Because I assume they could be pretty big.
I can't think of any off the top of my head. Of course, the one that was brought up to my attention when I was, 25. But I think some of the other consequences can be anything from picking a paint color that is not standard, to putting the wrong kind of glass in, or leaving the glass from a previous project in that doesn't meet the requirement, the mechanical requirements, or energy requirements. Warranties on roofs, choosing a mill thickness on a roof that doesn't have a warranty attached to it, or the correct warranty included in it. A lot of coordination within specifications, I think, between part 1 and part 2 are probably what we see the most. I host a specifier share group. Candace has been a guest on that before. And I like to ask them, what's the thing that drives you crazy about your spec? When you open up a spec and you see your section, what drives you crazy? And I would say most of the time what I hear is the lack of coordination between part one and part two. I think people can overlook the fact that, related sections listed a section that wasn't there. But the warranty thing where we're asking for a 20-year warranty on a product that doesn't have a warranty, or we had a warranty for a painted coating, but it's an anodized finish. Little things like that drives people crazy. And I get it. When we go fast.
The consequence of that is just wasted time, which equates back to money, right? Like
Right.
You're paying somebody to do this, and you're either paying them to do it up front, or you're paying them paying them is not really the right answer. It's like it's costing your business more to go back and figure this stuff out later, because a lot of times that's going to open up, a rabbit hole that you gotta chase that down, and then it's going to lead to some other issue, and then it's going to lead to some other issue, and that happens a lot because these things are going together into these more complex assemblies, and one change of one piece of that can really ripple into a lot of other parts as well.
Definitely. And we're also seeing that going back to the assemblies, where somebody's going to substitute a piece out of an NFPA 285 exterior wall assembly. And so they substitute the insulation, and the insulation they accepted doesn't fit an assembly. And so now we're starting over again.
Yeah.
The little things that you don't even think about.
How do you see specifications advancing? Where do you see it going, kind of a thing?
I've heard a couple different things, and some of them make sense. The one that I think makes the most sense is when we talk about bringing more in-house. I just talked to a roofing consultant that is now bringing an architect on staff. And they're like, we're just bringing more stuff in-house. And I also knew that because, or I was talking to that roof consultant because I helped them write a spec, because they were bringing more of their specs in-house. And now they're bringing an architect on staff too. So I think as the individual trades grow, like the roof consultant is a great example, right? So the roof consultant has their own spec because now they're the prime contract holder. And so now they need an architect. So they're kind of becoming their own architectural firm, right? For these very specific projects. So I do see a lot of that growth. People are getting a little bit more savvy on how they can be more efficient and
add more value too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Cutting out that middle person. Why should I hire an architect if I can do it in-house and then have somebody all the time? So yeah, just that innovative thinking, going back to the word innovative, I think, being more efficient with our time, I think is going to make us more accurate. We're bringing our experts in-house. I think it's going to really help our quality control go up.
Yeah.
The word that comes to mind is integrated to me, right? It's like the more integrated we can be, and really it's really about taking responsibility and adding more value, right? It's not passing the buck. It's not pointing the finger. It's not like, who do I get to look at when something goes wrong, but really getting in front of these issues and educating people through the process and owning that. I mean, I think that's really cool to see that that's happening with building product manufacturers and specifiers and architects, and because coordination is difficult, and so all the help we can get in that area, I think is great. And I think what's neat about this is it kind of goes back to where your origin story in architecture began, which was like, there's all these opportunities out there that we don't learn about in school. And this is another one that you just brought up right now. It's like you can actually become an architect and go work for a product manufacturer and really help integrate their products into projects in a much more valuable way so that it can happen more often. I think that sounds really great.
And I see more manufacturers reps, and actually I hope maybe this is just a dream, but I hope more manufacturers reps consider taking on more specification writing, because I think they are the experts on not only their product, but they're out there in the field seeing things that need to be integrated, and all that knowledge that could be embedded into their specifications and how they can grow, so I've seen where hardware manufacturers are now writing hollow metal door specs and sound door specs in addition to the hardware specs. Okay, that makes sense. But what if they went a little bit further? Maybe the envelope consultants start writing their own specs. Not the envelope consultants, the manufacturer's reps for exterior building products like air barriers, So what if they wrote an air barrier spec, and maybe they do an assembly spec too, and they do the insulation and have options for the cladding, so they're really becoming more valuable to the team by integrating into the team and building credibility within their teams.
And as an architect, and Candace, I mean, I would love to hear what you think about this too, because it's like, what, oh my gosh, to have that resource available is a lifesaver. Like, I don't want to do all that stuff because I can't, right? There's just too many things to do. And so, and kudos back to you for like seeing this path and pursuing it, because you're adding value to, of course, you love what you're doing and somebody else loves what they're doing, and those two things aren't the same, but they go together, right? Like that to me is we should be encouraging more of that in this industry.
Yeah, I think that's why these conversations are so important, because you can say things like that and then we hear, that's what you need, you got it,
right?
And that's how most people will react. And so if that's what you're seeing in the industry, I think that there's definitely going to be a turn that way. So I'm hoping that that'll be the exact instance as well.
We just got to plant seeds.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, Sherry, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for sharing with us today, and I appreciate your participation in the podcast, and we'll put links where the audience can get in contact with you, your website, your LinkedIn profile, and learn more about what you're offering specifically. And again, thank you for doing this with us today.
Fantastic. Thank you. I appreciate it.